If you're the kind of person who still feels pulled toward the wrong person, this is for you. If you don't fix this, you'll keep reopening wounds every time they text or pop back into your life. Today I'll give you one rule and one line that help you heal after loving the wrong person. We'll use it in a real Friday night moment when your ex messages you and you'd normally spiral. If that sounds like something you need, stay with me. You're standing in the kitchen late at night, staring at a message you knew might come someday. It's from the person who broke you in ways you still struggle to explain. Your stomach tightens, your chest feels hollow, and for a moment you wonder if you've actually healed at all, because here you are again, frozen, conflicted, and hurting in a way that feels familiar and exhausting. And the worst part is, you're not even sure why it still hits this hard. Here's the thing almost no one will say to you out loud, it's not that you're weak for still feeling this. It's that loving the wrong person can distort your sense of yourself long after they're gone. It leaves echoes. It leaves habits. It leaves stories about why things happened the way they did, and most of those stories aren't even true. What made this so painful wasn't just the relationship itself. It's the way it makes you question your worth. Maybe you kept trying to fix things that weren't yours to fix. Maybe you kept shrinking your needs because they always felt louder. Maybe you stayed longer than you should have because you kept hoping the version of them you fell for would magically come back. And every time you revisit those memories, you feel like you're re-injuring the same bruise. If nothing shifts, you risk letting the past decide the tone of your future connections. You risk carrying old wounds into new rooms. You risk confusing emotional intensity with emotional safety again. And deep down, you know you can't afford to repeat that cycle. Today, I'm going to help you untangle this. By the time we're done, you'll be able to make sense of what happened without blaming yourself for everything. You'll understand how to stop dragging those old patterns into new relationships. And you'll start feeling worthy of healthy love again, even if you feel like you're rebuilding from scratch. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. If you want steady Stoic focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships every week, this is the channel for you. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Here's how we're going to do this today. First, we'll break apart the story you've been telling yourself about why that relationship hurt so much, because most of the blame you've been carrying doesn't actually belong to you. Next, we're going to look at how you accidentally kept their patterns running in your mind long after they left, and how to finally shut those loops down. Then, we'll build a new internal baseline so you stop confusing chaos for chemistry. After that, we'll walk through what it means to be emotionally disciplined in love, not cold, not distant, but grounded in a way that keeps you safe. Finally, I'm going to show you a real scenario where all of this comes together, so you can see how these tools actually work when emotions spike and your old habits try to drag you backward. There's one moment later in this lesson I want you to listen for. It's the part where you get a message on a Friday night, something short, something unexpected, and something loaded. And instead of spiraling or answering automatically, you'll use one sentence that changes the entire dynamic. When we get there, you'll see exactly how much power you've been giving away without realizing it, and how to pull it back in a calm, steady way that doesn't hurt you. What you're feeling isn't strange and it isn't permanent. People don't talk enough about how long it takes for your nervous system to stop reacting to a person who once mattered deeply. It's not logic, it's imprinting. It's muscle memory. And when you hear from them, or when something reminds you of them, your body reacts before your mind has time to think. This lesson is about helping your body and your mind sync again so you stop reliving an emotional past that's already over. You didn't choose the wrong person because you're flawed. You chose them because you were open, hopeful, trusting, and human. You believed what they showed you in the beginning. And it's okay that you did. Most people would have. But healing after loving the wrong person isn't about rewriting the past. It's about rewriting your role in it. It's about seeing what was yours and what wasn't. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that the relationship asked you to silence. When you do that, something incredible happens. The grief softens, the self-blame dissolves, and the story stops being a wound and starts becoming wisdom. By the end of this lesson, I want you to feel something you may not have felt in a long time, the sense that you're not broken. You're not behind. You're not doomed to repeat the same heartbreaks again and again. You were shaped by that experience, yes, but you weren't defined by it. And the fact that you're here, listening, learning, trying to break the cycle, means you're already further along than you think. So take a breath. Settle in. Let yourself be open to the possibility that your heart can learn a different rhythm. And keep listening for that Friday night moment later, because it's going to be the place where everything we talk about snaps into focus in a way you won't forget. You can't start healing until you stop telling yourself the wrong story about why that relationship hurt so much. The shift begins with one simple but difficult move. You stop assuming every painful moment was your fault. You stop carrying the entire emotional weight of something that two people created. If you don't do this, you'll keep replaying old scenes, rewriting them so you're always the one who should have done more, should have known better, and should have said the perfect thing at the perfect time. That habit drains your confidence and makes you question whether you can trust your own judgment again. And if you don't interrupt it, you risk walking into your next connection already convinced you're the problem. Here's why this matters so much. Your mind builds narratives to protect you from uncertainty. When something ends badly, it feels safer to blame yourself because at least it gives you a sense of control. You think, if it's my fault, then I can prevent it next time. But relationships aren't equations where one person's effort guarantees a result. Sometimes someone couldn't meet you where you were because they weren't emotionally available. Sometimes their needs were shaped by old wounds you didn't cause. Sometimes they loved the idea of you but not the responsibility of loving you well. Marcus writes about not letting another person's behavior define your value, and that applies here. Their limits weren't proof of your inadequacy. When you stop taking responsibility for their patterns, you start seeing yourself more clearly again. This is how a more grounded version of you begins to respond instead of collapsing into self-blame. There's one line I want you to practice using whenever the old story starts creeping in. Some things didn't work because they couldn't, not because I failed. Say it slowly. Let it land in your body. This isn't an excuse, it's clarity. It's what allows you to separate who you were from what happened. Picture this in a real setting, something simple and very North American. You're sitting in your car in the parking lot outside a Target, and you've just run into someone who used to know both you and your ex. They make a casual comment, something like, "I heard things didn't end well." You must have been devastated. You feel your shoulders tense because you know what usually happens next. You start defending the other person. You downplay your pain. You offer a neat explanation that makes you look composed but also makes you responsible for every messy part of the breakup. You nod, you smile, you say, "Yeah, I could have handled things better," even though the truth is far more complicated. But not today. Today you take a slow breath before answering, the kind you practiced earlier without even noticing. You feel your feet on the floor, the seat holding you, the tension leaving your jaw. And instead of collapsing into that old reflex, you say, "Some things didn't work because they couldn't, not because I failed." You don't go into detail. You don't apologize for things you didn't do. You don't shrink. And what happens? The conversation ends lighter. You walk into the store without that familiar heaviness. You don't spend the next hour spiraling through old memories. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's steady. It's self-respecting. That's what this section is about, reclaiming the truth without rewriting the past or beating yourself up. Here's one tiny action you can take today. Write the line somewhere you'll see it this week. On a note beside your laptop, in your phone's reminders, or even as your lock screen. Some things didn't work because they couldn't, not because I failed. You don't need to journal for an hour. You just need the line to interrupt the reflex that keeps pulling you backward. And right now, take a slow practice moment with me. Let your shoulders settle. Let your breath come in gently, a little deeper than normal. Hold it for a second, then let it out. Now say the line quietly to yourself, just once. And again, a little slower, noticing how your body softens when you stop fighting the old narrative. That's the shift. That's the beginning. This clarity will matter even more lately when you face that Friday night moment I mentioned earlier, because the person who reacts automatically is still tied to the old story. But the person who pauses and names what was never theirs to carry has room to choose differently. And that choice will save you from walking back into a dynamic that already took enough from you. When you understand that your worth wasn't determined by that relationship, something loosens inside you. You start seeing that you weren't naive for hoping things could get better. You were showing commitment, not desperation. You were trying because you cared. And caring is never the flaw. What hurt you was trying to build something with someone who didn't have the emotional tools to build with you. That doesn't make them a villain, and it doesn't make you broken. It just means the match was uneven. And when you stop rewriting history to make it look like you were the cause of every imbalance, you lift a weight you've been dragging for far too long. There's a part of you that already knows this. You've had moments where you saw the past clearly, maybe late at night, maybe during a quiet drive, maybe after hearing something your ex said to someone else. But clarity feels fragile when old emotions rise up. That's why this practice is slow and steady. You're teaching your body not to tense around memories that don't match who you are anymore. And the more you practice separating the story from the truth, the more you'll trust yourself again. You'll start noticing red flags earlier. You'll stop blaming yourself for someone else's distance. You'll stop chasing emotional crumbs because you'll remember you deserve a full meal. The wrong person may have distorted your view of yourself, but you're the one who gets to correct the lens. Hold on to this shift, because in the next part, we're going to take it deeper. We're going to dismantle the patterns that relationship left in your nervous system, so you stop reacting to new people as if they're the old one. And when we get to that Friday night message later, you'll see exactly how powerful this clarity becomes when the past tries to pull you back in. There's a pattern you've probably noticed without knowing how to describe it. Even after the relationship ended, certain moments still trigger you as if you're back inside it. A delayed text makes your stomach drop. Someone's tone shifts and your chest tightens before you can think. You start assuming disappointment before anything actually happens. The claim I want you to work with here is simple: you stop letting past emotional patterns run your present. Because if you don't interrupt these autopilot reactions, the old relationship will keep deciding how you feel in new situations. And the cost is real. You end up misreading people who aren't trying to hurt you. You overcorrect. You retreat too quickly or attach too fast. You make choices based on fear instead of clarity. Most people think healing is only about understanding what happened, but that's just the first layer. What you're really dealing with is conditioning. Your nervous system learned to predict chaos, tension, or disappointment based on small cues. It adapted to survive that environment. It learned to scan for danger even in quiet moments. And here's the part no one tells you: your body can keep reacting long after your mind has moved on. The Stoics talk about how impressions hit us before reason steps in, and that's exactly what you've been experiencing. The first surge of emotion isn't your choice, but what you do with it absolutely is. This is how a calmer future version of you begins to respond, by giving yourself a moment to separate the past from the present. I want you to practice using one line whenever your body reacts faster than your logic: this is an old signal, not a new threat. It's short, but it pulls you back into reality. It reminds you that your body isn't always accurate in its predictions. It gives your mind a chance to catch up before you spiral into assumptions. Imagine this in a familiar North American setting. You're texting someone new you've been getting to know, nothing intense yet, just steady conversations that feel easy. Then today, they take longer than usual to reply. You check your phone more than you want to admit. You notice yourself creating explanations you can't verify. They're losing interest. They're pulling away. You must have said something wrong. It's the same script your past relationship wired into you. The old reaction is immediate. You start rehearsing what you'll say when things fall apart, even though nothing has actually happened. But here's the shift. Instead of feeding the story, you feel the reaction in your chest and you tell yourself, this is an old signal, not a new threat. You take one breath. You put the phone down for a minute because you know what responding from panic looks like. And you give space for a new interpretation. An hour later they text back, apologizing because their work meeting ran long. You respond calmly, not because you forced yourself to act chill, but because you interrupted the pattern before it hijacked your entire mood. This is the difference between being driven by your history and being present with what's actually happening. Here's a tiny action for today. Identify one trigger that you know comes from that old relationship, something small, specific, and predictable. Maybe it's someone going quiet. Maybe it's a certain tone. Maybe it's waiting. Just name it. Write down one sentence. When this shows up, I'll use the line, this is an old signal, not a new threat. You don't have to fix the reaction today. You just need to be able to catch it as it happens. Take a slow moment with me now. Let your shoulders drop a bit, just enough to feel like you're here and not somewhere in the past. Breathe in gently, hold for a second, and breathe out. Bring to mind one moment this week when your body reacted before you had time to think. Don't judge it. Just notice it. Now repeat the line softly, this is an old signal, not a new threat. Let it echo inside you. You're teaching your system a new pathway. You're giving yourself room to think again. The deeper truth is that the wrong relationship didn't just break your heart, it trained your reflexes. And those reflexes kept you safe back then, but they don't belong in your present. You don't need to brace for impact with someone who isn't hurting you. You don't need to keep assuming disappointment every time something feels uncertain. You don't need to mirror the emotional landscape of a person who once confused you. You're allowed to reset. The next relationship, whether that's soon or far off, isn't meant to be a battlefield where you wait for the next emotional hit. It's meant to be a place where your body doesn't have to stay on guard. And here's the part that might feel uncomfortable. The healing of those reflexes doesn't come from meeting the right person. It comes from meeting yourself differently in those triggered moments. It comes from interrupting the old loops, from naming them, from refusing to let your past dictate the pace of your present. As you practice this, something starts to shift. You stop jumping to conclusions. You stop apologizing for emotions you didn't even express. You stop chasing reassurance you don't actually need. The trigger still shows up sometimes, but it doesn't own you. And every time you use that one line, this is an old signal, not a new threat, you create a little more room between stimulus and response. That's where healing lies. That's where your power is. Hold on to this idea because we'll build on it in the next part. You're going to learn how to reclaim your emotional baseline, so you're not mistaking intensity for intimacy anymore. And when we reach that Friday night moment later, this one sentence is going to be the thing that keeps you from falling back into a pattern that already hurt you once. There's a point in healing where you realize something uncomfortable. You've gotten used to relationships where your nervous system was always working overtime. The calm of something healthy feels strange, almost boring, because you learn to associate intensity with connection. So here's the claim for this section. You rebuild your emotional baseline so you stop confusing anxiety for attraction and chaos for chemistry. If you don't do this, you'll keep choosing what feels familiar instead of what feels safe. And the familiar patterns tend to be the ones that hurt you the most. The stakes here are real. If your baseline stays distorted, you'll keep gravitating toward people who activate your wounds instead of honoring your peace. This happens because your nervous system remembers the rhythm of the wrong relationship. Even when it was painful, it had a predictable cycle, high highs, low lows, emotional uncertainty packaged as passion. When something healthier comes along, your body doesn't recognize it as love. It recognizes it as silence, as stillness, as something that feels foreign. And foreign often feel unsafe. That's why you might lose interest in people who treat you well and stay hooked on people who keep you guessing. It's not that you want drama. It's that your system still believes unpredictability is normal. The Stoics were serious about training perception, about not letting old impressions distort new moments, and this is exactly what you're doing now. You're reclaiming the difference between emotional activation and emotional alignment. And this is how a steadier version of you starts living, by choosing a connection that doesn't require self-abandonment. Here's the line I want you to practice: calm isn't a lack of connection, it's the space where real connection grows. You repeat this every time you start mistaking peace for disinterest. Every time you start chasing the adrenaline spike of someone who can't show up consistently. Every time your mind whispers that something healthy feels off simply because it's different. Let's anchor this in a real North American moment. You're on a third date with someone new. You're sitting at a small table in a quiet restaurant, nothing fancy, just a place with good lighting and calm music. They're kind. They're attentive. They're steady. They ask thoughtful questions and actually listen to your answers. But somewhere in your chest, you feel a strange emptiness. You're used to sparks that burn too hot too quickly. You're used to mixed signals that keep you analyzing every message. You're used to misunderstandings that force you to work harder than you should so the connection doesn't fall apart. But this person sitting across from you isn't doing any of that. And your body doesn't know what to do with the absence of emotional turbulence. The old reaction starts forming. You begin telling yourself this person doesn't excite you. You start thinking something must be missing. You think about texting someone from your past just to feel that familiar rush again. Your mind starts doing laps around the idea that maybe you're just not ready for something real. But before the old pattern locks in, you pause. You feel your feet on the floor. You press your thumb against your fingers under the table just to anchor yourself. And in your mind you repeat the line: calm isn't a lack of connection, it's the space where real connection grows. You breathe in slowly, letting the words expand inside your chest. And suddenly something softens. You realize you've never really stayed long enough in a calm connection to see what it becomes. You've always jumped ship early, thinking the absence of chaos meant the absence of chemistry. But tonight, you let yourself stay. You listen. You laugh. You share small pieces of your life without overthinking. And for the first time in a while, you're present without bracing for impact. It feels strange. But it also feels like growth. Here's your tiny action for today. Identify one healthy behavior that makes you strangely uncomfortable. Maybe someone texts consistently and it feels too predictable. Maybe someone speaks kindly to you and it feels suspicious. Maybe someone respects your boundaries and it feels distant. Name just one. Then right beside it, my baseline is adjusting. You're not forcing yourself to feel something you don't feel. You're simply practicing staying in moments that don't activate your past. Now take a slow practice moment with me. Sit back a little, or let your shoulders shift away from that forward lean we do when we're bracing without realizing it. Breathe in through your nose for a count that feels natural, not dramatic, just steady. Hold for a heartbeat, then exhale like you're releasing tension from places that have been tight for too long. Think of a moment where calm felt suspicious to you. Something recent. Feel how your body reacted in that moment. And now say the line softly: calm isn't a lack of connection, it's the space where real connection grows. Let your breath slow as you say it. Let the tension drop by a degree. These small repetitions retrain you more than you think. Your emotional baseline determines what feels familiar, not what's right for you. And when the wrong relationship becomes your emotional blueprint, you start using it as a filter even after it's over. That's how you end up choosing people who stir up your anxiety instead of people who nurture your stability. But once you start adjusting the baseline, even just a little, your instincts shift. People who once felt boring begin to feel safe. People who once felt exciting begin to feel unpredictable. Your system learns new patterns not through huge breakthroughs, but through small, steady moments where you stay instead of fleeing. Later in this lesson, when we reach that Friday night message, this baseline work becomes crucial. Old patterns will try to pull you back into the emotional rhythm you've been healing from. But with this new awareness, you won't confuse that pull for passion anymore. You'll recognize it for what it is, the echo of a past that doesn't fit your future. What you're learning now isn't how to avoid love. It's how to recognize the kind that won't require you to lose yourself. You're giving your system a new definition of what chemistry feels like, one that includes steadiness, predictability, and emotional safety. And when you build from that place, everything else gets easier. You communicate without fear. You rest without apologizing. You show up without pretending. You don't chase love, you build it. Hold on to this shift because next, we're going to tackle something even deeper, the habit of overgiving and overexplaining that shows up when you've loved someone who didn't meet you halfway. And when we get to that Friday night moment later, you'll see exactly how this new baseline keeps you from walking straight back into a storm you already survived. There's a pattern that forms after loving the wrong person, and it often becomes so automatic you don't even recognize it happening. You start giving more than you should. You overexplain your feelings, your intentions, and your worth. You try to preempt misunderstandings before they exist. You work overtime to earn reassurance that shouldn't require labor. So here's the claim in this part. You break the habit of overgiving and overexplaining because it was a survival strategy in the old relationship, not a requirement for healthy connection now. If you don't address this, you'll drain yourself in every new relationship before it even has a chance to grow. You'll keep attracting people who take comfort in your overfunctioning while giving you very little in return. And the cost of staying stuck in that cycle is resentment, exhaustion, and the quiet belief that your needs are a burden. This pattern forms because the wrong relationship conditioned you to feel responsible for the entire emotional tone of the connection. If they pulled away, you leaned in. If they shut down, you opened up more. If they become cold, you become warmer. You learn to manage their mood, anticipate their reactions, and cushion their discomfort. And after enough repetition, you started believing a dangerous story, that love requires justification. You started thinking you had to make a case for why you deserved clarity or consistency or effort. The Stoics wrote often about not tying your worth to someone else's volatility, and that wisdom fits perfectly here. You aren't meant to be the emotional scaffolding for someone who can't meet you halfway. And this is how a calmer, more grounded version of you responds now, not by shrinking, not by overcompensating, but by choosing balance. Here's the exact line I want you to practice when you catch yourself explaining too much. I've said what I feel. I don't need to argue for my own clarity. This line stops the spiral. It breaks the momentum of overexplaining. It reminds you that your truth doesn't need to be rehearsed 5 times to be valid. Now picture this in a very familiar North American moment. You're sitting on your couch at the end of a long workday. Maybe Netflix is paused on the screen, maybe dinner is half-eaten beside you. You've been talking to someone new, nothing serious yet, but you've been hopeful. Tonight, they said something that rubbed you the wrong way. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't dramatic, but it felt dismissive. You tell them, calmly, that it didn't sit well with you. You're not trying to start an argument. You're not attacking. You're just naming how you feel. Then it happens, the reflex. The part of you that learned emotional gymnastics in the wrong relationship kicks in. You start writing long paragraphs explaining why you weren't trying to offend them, why you're not overreacting, why you're not difficult, why your concern was reasonable, why you expressed it respectfully, why they shouldn't misinterpret it. You feel compelled to package your feelings perfectly so they won't pull away. You feel responsible for the discomfort in the space, even though you didn't create it alone. But not this time. Halfway through typing a long explanation, something in you pauses. You remember the line. You breathe. And you delete the extra paragraphs you wrote out of fear. You send something simple instead. I've said what I feel. I don't need to argue for my own clarity. Not cold. Not defensive. Just honest. You set the tone. You protect your energy. You leave room for the other person to meet you where you are instead of you sprinting toward them. And you know what happens? Even if they respond imperfectly, you don't lose yourself trying to manage their reaction. You stay centered. Here's the tiny action I want you to take today. Identify one area where you routinely overexplain. Maybe it's texting. Maybe it's when you feel someone's tone shift. Maybe it's when you sense distance. Choose one situation and commit to using the line once this week. I've said what I feel. I don't need to argue for my own clarity. You're not trying to win anything. You're simply practicing self-respect in real time. Take a slow practice moment with me right now. Place your attention on your breath, not deep or dramatic, just steady. Notice how your chest feels when you think about a recent moment where you explained yourself more than needed. Let that memory come up lightly, not to judge yourself but to see it clearly. Now whisper the line, "I've said what I feel. I don't need to argue for my own clarity." Again, slower this time. Feel the difference between asserting clarity and chasing validation. That difference is where freedom starts. Overgiving and overexplaining often masquerade as kindness or commitment, but underneath they're rooted in fear. Fear of losing someone. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of not being enough. And the wrong relationship taught you to carry those fears like responsibilities. But healthy relationships aren't built on hyper-performance. They're built on mutual effort. When you stop trying to earn your place, you open space for people who show up because they want to, not because they've been persuaded. As you break this pattern, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. You stop over-apologizing for your needs. You stop sending long messages just to feel safe. You stop cushioning every feeling with disclaimers. You stop walking on emotional eggshells to keep the peace. And people who expected you to carry the emotional load will either adjust or fall away. Both outcomes protect you. And when we reach that Friday night moment later in this lesson, this shift will matter more than you think. Because the person who used to drain you might try to re-enter your life with the same dynamic as before. The moment you feel that old pull to explain yourself or prove your worth, this one line becomes your anchor. It stops you from stepping back into a role you've outgrown. You don't have to earn love by overworking your heart. You don't have to perform emotional labor to keep someone interested. You don't have to translate yourself into a softer version just to avoid conflict. You're allowed to express your needs without writing essays. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to let your clarity stand on its own. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. Not rigid, not distant, just confident in a quiet, steady way that doesn't collapse under pressure. This is how you reclaim emotional balance. This is how you stop sacrificing your peace to maintain a relationship dynamic that never respected you enough. And this is how you make room for someone who won't require you to shrink or over-explain to feel chosen. Hold on to this shift because next, we're going to explore how silence, distance, or mixed signals from someone else no longer need to send you spiraling. And when we get to that Friday night moment later, you'll see exactly how much your life changes when you stop over-explaining and start honoring your own clarity. There's a moment in every healing journey where you realize you were reacting to silence, distance, or mixed signals as if they were emergencies. A delayed reply felt like abandonment. A short message felt like rejection. A quiet tone felt like punishment. So here's the claim for this part. You learn to stop personalizing someone else's inconsistency. If you don't do this, every emotionally ambiguous moment will control your mood, your thoughts, and your sense of stability. You'll keep assuming you caused a shift when it might have nothing to do with you. And the cost is heavy. You lose hours, sometimes days, to mental spirals that never lead anywhere useful. This matters because your mind was trained in the wrong relationship to treat distance as danger. When someone you cared about became unpredictable, your system adapted. It scanned for emotional cues. It tried to solve puzzles no one asked you to solve. It rushed to fill silence with assumptions. The Stoics emphasized that you can't let external behavior dictate your internal state, and that's exactly what you're learning now. You're building a new reflex, one that says, someone else's inconsistency isn't evidence of my inadequacy. This is how a steadier version of you responds instead of spiraling. Here's the microscript I want you to use whenever silence or mixed signals trigger that old fear. Their behavior is about them. My worth isn't up for debate. Say it exactly like that. It's not defensive. It's not dismissive. It's grounding. It stops you from turning every quiet moment into an indictment of your value. Let's put this into a familiar North American moment. It's a weekday evening. You're home after work, maybe sitting on the edge of your bed scrolling through your phone. You've been talking to someone you like, someone who seemed engaged, consistent, intentional. But today they've replied less than usual. Or their messages feel shorter. Or they disappeared mid-conversation. Immediately, your body reacts. Your mind starts racing ahead of the facts. You check the thread again and again, as if staring at the phone will bend the universe back into alignment. The old reaction comes up fast. You start rereading your last message to see if you said something wrong. You imagine them pulling away. You imagine interest fading. Your stomach knots. You consider sending a follow-up message to clarify things even though nothing is actually unclear. You search for signs you misread everything. But this time, you interrupt the spiral. You remember the line. You take a breath, not dramatic, just enough to break the momentum. You put the phone down on the nightstand, even if it feels uncomfortable. And quietly you say to yourself, their behavior is about them. My worth isn't up for debate. Immediately, the fog lifts. You still care, you still feel the pull of uncertainty, but you're not drowning in it. You make a different choice. Instead of obsessing over what their silence means, you return to your own life, your evening, your tasks, your peace. Hours later, they text back with a simple explanation. Busy day. Long meeting. Tired. No big story. And you realize the silence was never about you. The spiral was. Here's today's tiny action. Choose one communication pattern that usually sends you into high alert. Maybe it's someone taking longer to respond. Maybe it's a short okay. Maybe it's a shift in tone. Name it out loud or write it down. Then commit to using the line once this week when that trigger shows up. Their behavior is about them. My worth isn't up for debate. Once is enough to begin rewiring the reflex. Let's take a slow practice moment together right now. Unclench your jaw even slightly. Feel your shoulders drop half an inch. Notice your breath without forcing anything. Think of a moment when silence made you anxious recently. Let the memory surface lightly, without gripping it. Feel what your body does, tight chest, restless hands, shallow breathing. Now say the line slowly, their behavior is about them. My worth isn't up for debate. Again, softer. Notice how your breath naturally extends on the exhale when you stop arguing with reality. This is the beginning of emotional recalibration. One of the hardest truths to accept is that not everything someone does is a message about you. Sometimes people are inconsistent because they're overwhelmed. Sometimes they've got their own fears, their own insecurities, and their own patterns that predate you. Sometimes they're just not ready for the level of connection you bring. And none of those possibilities require you to diminish yourself. None of them are evidence that you need to work harder. When you stop personalizing their behavior, you free up emotional space you didn't know you'd been renting out. You stop chasing explanations you can't access. You stop bending your schedule or your needs around someone who hasn't earned that level of influence in your life. You stop assuming the worst. Instead, you move with clarity. You respond instead of reacting. You let things reveal themselves without forcing meaning onto silence. People who are consistent will appreciate your calm. People who aren't won't be able to manipulate your emotional state. Either way, you win, because you stay in control of your internal world. This shift also protects your future relationships. When you no longer interpret every small pause as abandonment, you create room for real intimacy. You stop micromanaging the connection. You stop reading between lines that don't contain hidden messages. You stop demanding certainty from a dynamic that's still unfolding naturally. You let things breathe. And in that space, the right person will show you who they are, without you trying to decode every step. Later in this episode, when we reach that Friday night moment, the message that comes out of nowhere, loaded with memories and emotional history, this practice becomes crucial. The old you would have reacted instantly, personalizing every word, reading it as a commentary on your value. But the version of you we're shaping here pauses, breathes, and sees the message for what it is, not what your past trained you to fear. You don't have to keep treating uncertainty as a threat. You don't have to let mixed signals decide your self-worth. You don't have to absorb every shift in someone else's energy like it's your responsibility to fix. You're learning to give meaning only to what's earned. You're learning to stay steady even when someone else wavers. You're learning that your worth is constant, whether someone is attentive, distant, or somewhere in between. Hold on to this, because next we're going to explore how to build boundaries that don't come from fear but from self-respect. And when we reach that Friday night message later, you'll see exactly how these new boundaries protect the version of you that's finally emerging. There's a point in your healing where you realize something powerful but uncomfortable. You didn't just lose yourself in the wrong relationship, you stopped protecting yourself. You lowered your standards, softened your boundaries, ignored your instincts, and rationalized behavior that didn't deserve that much compassion. So here's the claim in this section: you rebuild boundaries that come from self-respect instead of fear. Because if you don't, you'll keep letting people into your life who drain you, confuse you, or treat you casually while you treat them seriously. The stakes are high. Without steady boundaries, you'll repeat the emotional patterns that already cost you too much, and you'll call it connection when it's really self-abandonment in disguise. Boundaries get a bad reputation because most people think of them as walls. But real boundaries are instructions for how you want to be treated. They're clarity, not confinement. They're honesty, not hostility. They're the difference between showing up fully and showing up resentfully. In the wrong relationship, you learn to bend yourself into a shape that kept the peace. You learn to prioritize their comfort over your well-being. You learn to avoid conflict because conflict always felt like punishment. The Stoics talked about living according to your values rather than reacting to other people's moods. That idea applies here. Boundaries aren't about controlling someone else, they're about staying aligned with yourself. This is how a steadier version of you begins to live, by not negotiating your non-negotiables. Here's the microscript I want you to use whenever someone pushes past your limits or expects more access to you than you want to give. That doesn't work for me, but here's what does. It's firm but not aggressive. Clear but not cold. And it creates structure around your needs instead of leaving everything up to the other person's preferences. Now let's bring this to a very relatable North American moment. It's a Thursday night. You've had a long day at work, maybe dealing with back-to-back meetings or a workload that has stretched your patience thin. You finally sit down, maybe with takeout on your lap or a show in the background, and your phone buzzes. It's someone you've been talking to, a person who keeps things inconsistent but interesting. They message, "Want to hang out? I'm near your area." On the surface it sounds spontaneous, playful, maybe even flattering. But deep down, you know what this is. They didn't plan. They didn't check in earlier. They're reaching out because it's convenient for them, not considerate of you. The old reaction kicks in quickly. You start thinking, if I say no, they might lose interest. You feel pressure to say yes even though you're exhausted. You start rewriting your evening in your mind, making space you didn't want to make. You feel guilty for wanting rest. You feel obligated to perform availability to keep the connection alive. This is the pattern that kept you trapped before. But tonight, you pause. You take a breath that softens something in your chest. You remember the script. You type back something simple: "Tonight doesn't work for me, but here's what does. Let's plan ahead and pick a day that works for both of us." You hit send. And after you do, you feel a rush of relief. Not because they responded perfectly, they might not. But because you didn't sacrifice your energy to accommodate someone else's impulse. You protected your evening. You protected your peace. You protected the version of you who no longer jumps to meet someone where they failed to meet you. Here's your tiny action for today. Define one boundary that you want to uphold moving forward, just one. Maybe it's not accepting last-minute plans. Maybe it's not engaging in conversations after a certain time. Maybe it's not responding when you're emotionally flooded. Maybe it's not chasing clarity that someone else isn't offering. Write one of these down and pair it with the line, "That doesn't work for me, but here's what does." Your job isn't to enforce it perfectly. Your job is to practice saying it once this week when the situation appears. Now take a slow practice moment with me. Let your breath come in softly, like you're creating space for yourself inside your own body. On the exhale, let your shoulders loosen even a little. Think of a time recently when you crossed your own boundary to keep someone else comfortable. Don't judge it. Just see it clearly. Now say the line gently, "That doesn't work for me, but here's what does." Feel how different your body reacts when you give yourself permission to choose yourself in small ways. Boundaries are not ultimatums. They're invitations for people to meet you at your level. The right people won't resist them, they'll appreciate them because boundaries create safety, reliability, and emotional clarity. The wrong people will push back or disappear, which only shows you what you needed to know sooner. Either outcome protects your future. And something else happens when you start practicing boundaries from a place of self-respect. You stop confusing intensity for intimacy. You stop confusing availability for compatibility. You stop confusing attention for affection. You stop confusing emotional chaos for connection. Boundaries filter out situations where you once would have sacrificed yourself to keep someone's inconsistent interest. And they make room for the kind of relationship where you don't have to shrink, prove, or perform to be valued. As you get better at this, you'll notice that the weight you carried before begins to lift. You spend fewer nights agonizing over someone's unpredictability. You spend less time rehearsing explanations. You stop trying to earn what should be freely given. The relationships you cultivate become calmer, clearer, and kinder, not because other people change, but because you change the way you show up. And later in the lesson, when we reach that Friday night message, the one dripping with nostalgia, mixed signals, and emotional leverage, your boundary will be the difference between falling back into the old dynamic and protecting the version of you you've worked so hard to rebuild. Boundaries don't guarantee the other person changes. They guarantee that you don't. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong people. And once you practice boundaries from a place of groundedness, not fear, you'll feel the shift in every new connection. You won't chase. You won't overgive. You won't abandon yourself. You'll know exactly what works for you and what doesn't, and you'll live according to that knowledge. Hold on to this work because next, we're going to deal with emotional balance, the ability to stay centered even when your feelings flare up. And when that Friday night message arrives later, your ability to stay balanced will turn a moment that used to break you into a moment you walk through with strength. There's a part of healing people rarely talk about, and it's one of the hardest pieces to master. Even after you've adjusted your baseline, even after you've broken old reactive patterns, even after you've started rebuilding boundaries, your emotions can still surge in a way that feels overwhelming. A memory hits. A message shows up. Someone new triggers a fear you don't want to admit you carry. So here's the claim for this section: you learn to stay emotionally balanced when your feelings spike instead of letting the spike take over your choices. Because if you don't learn this, your emotions will keep making promises your life can't afford. You'll send messages you regret. You'll reopen doors that should stay closed. You'll step back into dynamics that were already too costly. The stakes are big. One moment of emotional intensity can undo weeks of progress if you let the old reflexes take the wheel. This matters because your past conditioned you to treat emotional intensity as urgency. When someone upset you, you reacted instantly. When someone confused you, you scrambled to fix the tension. When someone pulled away, you chased clarity. You were always on high alert, always interpreting emotions as commands. But emotion isn't instruction, it's information. And when you slow down enough to see the difference, everything shifts. The Stoics talked about pausing long enough to let reason catch up to impulse, and that's exactly what this part of your healing is about. Emotional balance doesn't mean you feel less. It means you feel fully without losing yourself inside the feeling. This is how a more grounded version of you behaves when life presses on old bruises. Here's the microscript for this section, and I want you to memorize it. I can feel this without acting on it. It's a simple sentence, but it breaks the link between emotion and impulsive reaction. It gives you the space to breathe. It reminds you that not every surge needs to become a decision. Now let's anchor this in real life, something familiar, something very North American. It's Saturday afternoon. You've got laundry running, maybe coffee brewing, maybe music playing low in the background. It's an ordinary day, calm and uneventful, and you feel steady. Then your phone lights up with a name you haven't seen in a long time. Someone who once broke your sense of safety. Someone whose attention still lights up your chest and tightens your throat, even though you wish it didn't. They've sent a short message. Maybe it's hey. Maybe it's been thinking about you. Maybe it's something nostalgic, something that pulls you toward the past with a speed that surprises you. Your body reacts before your mind does. Heart rate spikes. Your stomach flips. Your hands get warm. It feels like being pulled into a current you thought you were done swimming in. And the old reflex kicks in, answer now. Keep the connection alive. Respond quickly so you don't lose whatever this sudden attention means. You feel the pull to rewrite the story, to believe maybe things could be different this time. But today, you interrupt the reflex. You set the phone down, face down, even though that feels unnatural. You take one steady breath, and you say to yourself, softly, I can feel this without acting on it. The moment doesn't disappear. The memory doesn't evaporate. But you create space. You allow the intensity to rise and fall without letting it dictate your next move. You remind yourself that feeling something doesn't obligate you to respond to it. The message has power only if you immediately give it power. You choose not to. For now, you simply let the emotion exist without letting it decide for you. Here's your tiny action for today. The next time you feel a surge, whether it's anxiety, longing, frustration, or confusion, pause for 5 seconds before responding to anything. Just 5. During those 5 seconds, say the line in your mind, I can feel this without acting on it. You're not suppressing your emotions. You're staying present enough to make a choice you won't regret later. Let's take a slow practice moment right now. Sit the way you're sitting. Don't adjust anything unless your body wants to. Let your breath find its natural rhythm. Think of a moment earlier this month when your emotions spiked. The kind of moment that made your heart race or your thoughts scatter. Let that memory sit lightly in your mind, not to relive it, but to observe it. Notice what your body does just imagining it. And now whisper the line, I can feel this without acting on it. Let the sentence stretch across your internal landscape like a soft hand on your shoulder. Repeat it again, slower. Notice how the emotion loosens when you don't fight it and don't obey it. Emotional balance isn't about staying calm all the time. It's about trusting yourself to remain steady inside intensity. When you can feel deeply without acting impulsively, you stop recreating the conditions of the old relationship. You stop sending messages in panic. You stop breaking your own boundaries for momentary reassurance. You stop jumping back into situations that took you months to climb out of. You start choosing responses that align with the person you're becoming, not the version of you that was shaped by someone who didn't know how to love you well. And something else shifts when you practice this repeatedly. You start recognizing that intensity doesn't equal meaning. Chemistry doesn't equal compatibility. Nostalgia doesn't equal progress. Emotion doesn't equal action. You reclaim agency. You reclaim your pace. You reclaim the ability to choose when and how you respond instead of reacting from fear, longing, or old habit. When we reach the Friday night moment later in this lesson, this one sentence will be the thing that saves you from slipping back into a dynamic that once stole your peace. Because that moment is designed, by circumstance, not intention, to activate every unresolved pattern you've been working through. And the version of you who pauses, breathes, and says, I can feel this without acting on it, is the version of you who finally breaks the cycle. You're not training yourself to feel less. You're training yourself to handle feeling more without losing balance. That's real strength. That's real growth. And that's what gives you the power to choose love that's steady instead of love that's familiar but harmful. Hold on to this, because next we're stepping into the story that ties everything together, the moment where the past presses its hand against your door and you get to decide which version of yourself answers. It's Friday night. You're finally home after a long week, the kind of week that leaves your shoulders tight and your mind buzzing even when the day is done. You're in the kitchen making something simple, maybe reheating leftovers, maybe pouring a drink, maybe just standing there waiting for your body to catch up to the fact that it's the weekend. Your phone lights up on the counter. You don't think anything of it at first. Then you see the name. It's them. The person who once made you feel seen and invisible in the same breath. The person your body still remembers even though your mind has outgrown the story. The message is short. Hey, I was thinking about you. It hits you in the center of your chest before you have time to think. Your heart jumps, your stomach drops, and suddenly it feels like you've stepped back into a version of yourself you worked hard to move past. This is the moment we talked about earlier, the moment where old patterns try to take the wheel. Your first instinct is the old one. Respond instantly. Keep the connection alive. Follow the spark before it disappears. But then something familiar rises inside you, the sense that you've been here before and that reacting out of habit has never saved you. This is where everything you've been practicing quietly threads itself together. You pick up the phone. Your thumb hovers over the keyboard. You feel the urge to explain, to ask questions, to find meaning in the few words they sent. But then you pause. You remember section 3, the reflex you've been learning to interrupt. This is an old signal, not a new threat. You breathe that truth in, not because it erases the feeling, but because it gives you back your balance. Your body is reacting to history, not reality. You set the phone down for a moment, face down on the counter. Your breath is slightly uneven, so you steady it, just enough to feel like you're back in the room instead of inside your chest. You already know this moment used to own you. It doesn't have to anymore. You walk into the living room and sit down, letting the quiet wrap around you. The message is still there, but it's not pulling you as violently as it did a minute ago. You remember the work you did in adjusting your baseline, how calm used to feel like something was missing. Tonight, it feels like protection. But then another wave hits. A softer one. Nostalgia. You remember the early days with them, the spark, the laughter, the feeling of being wanted even if it was inconsistent. That's when the old version of you would have explained everything you were feeling, everything you missed, everything you wished could have gone differently. You catch the old urge to over-explain rising in your throat. Section 5 comes back to you like an anchor. I've said what I feel. I don't need to argue for my own clarity. Except tonight, you haven't said anything yet, and maybe clarity means not engaging at all. You pick up the phone again. Maybe you'll say something. Maybe you won't. But you refuse to let your emotions make the choice for you. You breathe once, slow and steady, and whisper the line from section 8, I can feel this without acting on it. And it works. The feeling doesn't vanish, but it becomes something you can observe instead of drown in. The message still sits there on the screen, glowing in the dim light of your living room. You read it again. Hey, I was thinking about you. You think about how many times you filled in the blanks for them, how often you mistook their sudden warmth for change. But tonight, you don't fill in anything. You read what they actually wrote instead of what your heart used to project onto it. It's a message, not a promise. You feel something shift. You're no longer asking what the message means. You're asking what it costs. And more importantly, you're asking what version of yourself would answer. You take one more breath, this one deeper, conscious. A slow practice moment woven right into the real scene. You let the breath remind you that your pace matters. You let it clear the fog that nostalgia brought in. Maybe you answer. Maybe you don't. Tonight, what matters isn't the reply. It's the fact that your reply is no longer automatic. It's intentional. It comes from the present version of you, not the old one who kept hoping they would change. You decide not to respond right away. Not out of punishment. Not out of fear. But because you want to make choices from clarity, not emotional momentum. You put the phone on the table and walk away, not dramatically, just steadily. You finish your meal. You sit on the couch. You feel everything you're feeling, without letting any of it drag you backward. For the first time in a long time, the past knocked and you didn't answer from the version of you who used to break for them. You answered from someone steadier. Someone who knows their worth. Someone who chooses intention over impulse. And the night feels different because of it. Calmer. Cleaner. Yours. What this entire lesson has really been about is reclaiming your sense of self after loving the wrong person. It's about shifting from reacting to your emotions to responding to your life with intention. It's about moving from a scattered, wounded version of yourself into a grounded one who understands that love doesn't require self-abandonment. This wasn't a lesson about forgetting the past. It was a lesson about no longer letting the past run your present. First, we looked at how the old relationship left you with a story that blamed you for everything, and how changing that story opens the door to healing. Then we dismantled the old emotional patterns your body still reacts to, giving you the sentence that lets you separate the past from the present. Next, we talked about resetting your baseline so you stop mistaking chaos for chemistry and learn to stay in the calm long enough to see what it becomes. After that, you learned how overgiving and overexplaining weren't signs of commitment but survival strategies from the wrong relationship, and how you can now choose balance over self-sacrifice. Then we explored how not every shift in someone else's energy is about you, and how to stop personalizing inconsistency that has nothing to do with your worth. Next, we walked through boundaries, how they're not walls but invitations for people to meet you where you are. After that, you learn to stay emotionally steady even when your feelings spike, using one sentence that keeps you from acting on impulse. And finally, we stepped into that Friday night moment where all of these tools came together and you handled the past with a version of yourself you've worked hard to build. Now I want to give you 3 do-today steps that turn everything from this episode into real change. Today, choose one moment where your body reacts before your mind and use the sentence, "This is an old signal, not a new threat." Don't try to fix anything, just interrupt the reflex. Sometime in the next 24 hours, identify one boundary you want to honor and say the line, "That doesn't work for me, but here's what does," at least once, even if your voice shakes. And before you reply to any emotionally loaded message, pause for 5 seconds and tell yourself, "I can feel this without acting on it," so your response comes from intention rather than anxiety. If what we talked about today resonated with you, the next lesson you'll want to hear is the one on emotional detachment, not the cold kind, but the steady kind that helps you stop absorbing other people's moods and start protecting your peace. It's the natural next step once you've learned to separate your past from your present and your emotions from your actions. If you want a whole library of Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships, this is what we do here every week. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.